Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another Scratch live session with Preface Nomad. All right. So today's project is going to be on the creation of your first ever multiplayer game with us. Stay tuned for more. We'll be back shortly. We'll be starting very soon. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Preface Nomad Scratch live tutorial. This will be the third one running this for this time. And for today, we're going to introduce our first ever multiplayer project. And through this, hopefully, you'll learn a bit more about how to create different game features, how to make a proper full game, and you can hopefully put this into your own work going further. All right, it's going to be an exciting project, and hopefully hopefully you guys will enjoy it and you guys can apply the same features into your own project too. So to begin with, let's just look at a bit of our games. All right, so we start off with, so just a little recap of what we learned so far. So we have parallel, so we started with parallel execution, right? And so that's the first we learned this week, parallel execution. That's to make two codes as long as they have the same event handler to go through different codes together at the same time. And the second thing we learned is touch detection. That's for learning about how the difference between touching a sprite and touching a color in Scratch and how they can be coded with. We also learn about different animation features where we learn how to make any walk loops, walk cycles, I should say, or how to make lip sync, and those are probably done. And the final thing we learned is a very important Scratch concept. It's called broadcast messaging. So for broadcast messaging, it's to allow sprites to communicate in the codes with each other. So it's something that they can stimulate themselves. So something that they can trigger by themselves. And hopefully these are things that you can also be putting into your own project. They're very useful parts, of course. All right, so today we're looking at game features through this building of the multiplayer game. So, let's kind of check it out. All right. So as you can see right now, there's a score. There's a player one score. There's a player two score. They're made from variables. We have the ball over here. Let's click the green flag and see what happens. So there's a 2 seconds, and afterwards, we can press the space key, which will enable the game to start. So right now you see that the ball is moving. The ball can move throughout the whole screen. And also it bounces off the edges, but it's not only bouncing off the edges, it also can bounce off the different players, right? All right, so remember, look at it. So the ball can go in any different direction to begin with. So it starts in the center, goes into different directions. And also, so once it's started, it can bounce between the players, it can bounce on the edge, and the players can move through different keys. One of the keys it can move, so for this blue player here, it can move with the up and down button. Whereas for the red player here, it moves with the W and S keys. And this is part of the first creation for making the multiplayer game. All right. And finally, you can see that also the different things that happen. So kind of notice every single part of what's happening in the project. We have the ball. So notice the behavior of the ball and how it moves. Notice how we move the players. And finally, notice what happens when the ball collides with different things. For example, what happens when it collides with the players, or what happens when it collides with the goal, right? So hopefully you all know the rules of football to begin with. When the ball goes to opposition net, it basically results in a goal to you, right? Simple enough. And for now, there's no score that we have to reach. So there's no to say whether if one person reaches a score of 5, then there would be a winner or something. There's nothing of this such for now. So it's just a live game where the score can be endless. But if you want to make a condition for it, so you can feel free to do so. Okay, so this would be the introduction of our project. So today's project You can see there are a lot of different sprites that we have here. And therefore, that's why for today, we're not really going to do much of the designing aspect. Rather, it's more to do with creating this whole game, right? So, or coding this whole game, I should say. So let's start off. So I want you guys all to be logged into your own account to begin with. So and once you're there, you should reach your home page. Make sure you're logged in. So I'm logged into Preface Nomad Teacher. And to begin with, I'm going to type some words in the search bar here. I'm going to type in Mark_Preface. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, underscore. Underscore is the key that's next to the number 0. So you have to press shift and then that key, and then you would get an underscore and then preface. And afterwards, you enter, and you should reach a bunch of different projects. Go to the lowest one where you can see a football pitch right there. That should be the correct one. And once you're there, I want you to click into it. And I want you to press this remix button. So for people who have been going through our YouTube series right now, for all our diligent coders who have been going through it, I'm sure you guys have done remixing quite a few times now. So this procedure should be very familiar with you. If it's your first time with us, make sure you got the steps just now. And if you have any questions, make sure that you comment on our Facebook Live so you can have further instructions on what to do. All right. So I'm going to press this green button here that says remix, and we're going to go in. So once again, for people who can't find, I'm able to find it just now, go to your search button, type in Mark_Preface, and then find the project with the football pitch. Now, some of you guys may probably ask, why don't I just start off by searching, Preface Football SC like this? So just the title of this whole project. So you can try it actually. And what you'll actually realize is that nothing comes up. So this is actually just a little bug that Scratch has, is that it doesn't update its shared projects that quickly. So if you're a new learner on Scratch, so if you're new on Scratch, you just made a new project and you're trying to share it with everyone, there may be chances where they can't find it yet, because the Scratch servers, they update the shared projects possibly like once every 2 weeks or once per month. So sometimes it might take a while before your projects really get onto is able to be shared to everyone. That is, but be patient. So there are other ways that you can find it as long as your project is shared. So for mine, I just go to the account that made it. So Mark Preface, and then I can, click into it. And again, right? So I just remixed it, so I'm not gonna remix it again, but for all of you guys that missed it just now, remember it's this green button here, right? And so remix basically just gives you a complete copy of the game. So you can apply it to any project. So for all the Scratch projects you see in the Explorer that you find that are fun, so any feature projects that you find are fun or something you want to make changes to with your friends, make sure you use it. It's a very good component that you can use to be able to to be able to do your own codes in, to be able to customize your favorite projects and make it into your own. So for us today, the reason why we're using the remix is because we want to be able to start off with having all the sprites. So these sprites can all be found on the Scratch library, I believe, apart from the goals which you need to download. And I've also made sure that they're all in position right now. And we have the goal 1 and goal 2 respectively. They're both in their respective places on the left and the right hand side of the screen, right at the edge. And we also, the player 1 and 2, they're also onto their respective sides, and with the ball in the middle. So if you recognize the setting, well done. This is exactly how the project starts, right? Good job. So to begin with, I want to make sure that even if I accidentally, like for example, if I accidentally drag this blue the blue player one over here, I can still make it go back to its original position once I click the green flag. And which is why in this part, I'm going to make sure I'm going to set every position of every sprite in the beginning. So remember the ball goes in the middle, right? So when the green flag is clicked, the ball goes to 0, 0. When player one is, so player one, we want to make sure that they stay in line as well as player two. So you can see that player two already has, you can see has an X of 180 and a Y of 0. So let's just get that green flag and get that go to coordinate, which you followed our clips code close enough on Preface Nomad Junior our YouTube account, you would know that it naturally automatically becomes the coordinate that is in that position. We're going to just duplicate this into player one, but make sure for the player one code that it's minus instead, because I want to make sure that they're on the left and right hand side of the screen, right? Of the whole backdrop. All right, so that's player one done, player two done, and the ball done. And what's missing are the goals. So in order to prevent the goals from creeping out, we do the exact same thing. So let's get the green flag, and then let's get that goal to block again and duplicate it from goal one to goal two. So right now, goal one, it says X is minus 250, so it goes to the left-hand side. So once we put it into the goal two, we have to make sure that it goes to the right-hand side. So if we make it to be on the left-hand side and we click green flag, they would both appear over here. That's absolutely not what we want, right? So we need to make that go to 250, 0, and voila, appears right into the right-hand side. Okay, so that's positioning all our sprites to begin with. So even if we're playing, we're having too much fun trying to drag things around, we essentially mess up and we put our player one over here. When we click the green flag, everything goes back to normal. Awesome. Okay. And so next up, we're going to work with the movement of player one and player two. So as you know, for this game, you can feel free to make your own variations, but in essence, I don't really, so for my original game, I don't really want the players to be able to cheat on one another. And what I mean by that is that I don't want the player one to be able to creep to the center line and score a goal and such. You can make this variation on your game too if you want, but I would prefer not to. So for player one, I'm really only moving up and down, right? Along the edge of the box. I'm only really moving up and down, which is why in the player one, I'm going to grab 2 blocks. So remember, player one for me, I wanted to move the up and down arrow, which is why I want to grab the blocks when space key pressed, but I don't use space key. I'm going to use my up arrow. So when the up arrow key is pressed, I want it to move up, right? Which is why I'm going to change my Y by 20. So this actually can, and then to make it move down, I'm going to duplicate this block, and then I'm going to make it so that when the down arrow is clicked, I'm going to change Y by minus 20. Now, I want you guys to check out something here. So up and down right now is in complete motion. So when I press the up button, you see it highlighted here, it moves up. And when I press the down button, it moves downwards, right? And so this is the speed that it's currently moving at. So if you want to make it a bit more challenging in terms of movement, you can make it less. So for example, if I make it change by 10 or minus 10, you can see that the range of movement is much less, right? So it's definitely harder to play around with. If you want to make it be able to move more, obviously just change it up. And so we realize that basically for player two, it follows the same behavior. That's to move up and down also, right? So, let's just try to duplicate these codes into player two, right? So let's just drag the up arrow key press into player two and the down arrow key press into player two also. Make sure that's inside. Just a tip for duplicating between sprites, by the way, to make sure that the sprite that the codes that you intend to put in another sprite actually goes inside. you have to hold down, the code, and you have to kind of hover above the sprite that you want to put it into. So you see, if I try to put into goal 1 right now, right? You can see that it does a little shiver. Like, so it just kind of, shakes a bit. So this is to tell you that, you're putting it into this sprite, right? So there's like a confirmation for you. So now once you see that little shake, you can just release, and then you can drag it, and basically it will be dropped into your sprite. All right. Okay, I don't need this in goal 1, so I'll delete that. So we have the movement for player 1 and player 2, right? Wrong, because right now the up and down of player 1 and 2 are both determined by our arrow key. So you see, we can't make a multiplayer game right now because basically the two sprites are both moved by the same event. So when the up arrow key press, not only does it move for the player, not only does the player 1 move up, but also player 2. So how do we solve this? Naturally, we will have to give player 2 a new set of events. So it can't use the up arrow key and the down arrow key. We have to give it new keys to use, right? So here's what we do. For player 2, we're going to change it. We're going to change it to W and S. So for all my passionate computer gamers, you would know that the reason why W and S is chosen is because the keys W, S, A, and D, they're actually the gaming keys. They're what we call gaming keys because they're almost in the shape of the up, down, left, right arrow keys. So if you look at it, the W is kind of the same position as the up arrow. The S is in the same position as the down arrow. The A is in the same position as the left arrow, and the D is in the same position as the right arrow. So in this way, it will look more like its own movement keyboard, which you can utilize. So right now, let's try it now. So now for my player 1, I use the up and down arrow keys, and it can go up and down accordingly. And the same thing happens for my player 2. So I'm moving up and down according by pressing W and S. And obviously you can make it any key you want. You can make it like T and G if you want to. You can make it a space key and the Z key too. So anything up to you, right? But make sure that you're really separating the W and S from the up and down. So you're making 2 different sets of keys for movements. And this is very important in multiplayer games because this is the way that you ensure that you can have 2 different characters doing different actions, right? So with this being said, for multiplayer game for now would be relatively simple in terms of player controlling the movement. And this is something I want to bring up about game features too. So over the week, you learn a bit about animations, right? So also for over here, what you learn about is game features. So for animation, it's about maybe walk cycles and lip sync. For games, right? Games has a lot to do with the user. You have to think a lot of the stuff in the aspect of how a user would want to see it. So it's a lot about really trying to imagine the person playing, how they would play it, and what they would find good or bad, right? So for game features, it's a lot about the user interactions with the application. So with the game and with the project, right? So this is one thing to consider when making your Scratch computer games. All right, so let's see what we have so far. So right now, our player can move, and when we press the green flag, everything returns in original position. So far, so good. We are going to continue with making the movement of the ball now. So you remember from the introduction of the whole project in the beginning, the ball only starts moving once we press the space key, right? So here we need to make sure, let's get the when space key pressed. It's going to wait a sec too, because if you start it off way too, so this once again something to do with putting your mind into how a user would feel. If when the space key press, it starts instantly, maybe you don't have time for like the players to get ready, right? So in that case, we'll just make it wait 1 second to begin with. And then afterwards, we begin. So first off, remember the ball can go in any direction, right? And the way we do this is that we go into motion and we get the point in direction. Now, when it's just point in the direction of 90, that's very simple. So when the space key is pressed, and let's just say if I make something like move 10 steps, for example, you would know for sure that the ball's gonna move to the right, right? As you can see right there, the ball moves to the right. But when you make it so that it can move in any direction, it becomes more unpredictable, which is also why we get the wait 1 second, is for those two players to really be alert that the ball could go anywhere to begin with, right? So in the point in direction part, we're going to get something we've used quite a lot, this pick random block right here. So basically, remember, pick random block, it helps you choose a number between a selected range of different numbers, right? So right now I have a range of 0 to 360, and it'll help me choose a single number from this range. So this number would not be more than 360, but it would not be less than 0. So right now I'm just going to make it this 50 so you guys can really see the difference in it. So whenever I click the green flag and I press the space key, so this made it move to the left over here this way. So if I try it again, it would go to a bit more higher up towards the left. And yeah, so now you can see that the ball basically moves in points to different directions in its movement. So next, to continue with the movement of the ball, I'm going to get a forever block. And then I'm going to use this move block here again. I'm going to push it into there. I'm going to make it move 15 steps to begin with. So when the space key is pressed right now, you can see it can move in any direction. But what's the issue here? The issue is that once it reaches the key, once it reaches the edge over here, it stops. So remember from our Pong game that we introduced, we use something called if on edge bounce. It's in the motion blocks a bit more lower underneath set Y to 0. Awesome, so now when the ball reaches the different parts, when it reaches the edge of the screen, so now it doesn't calculate the score yet, but when it reaches the different parts of the screen, you can see that it's able to bounce. Good, right? Okay, so let's move on a bit further. So now the ball can move completely fine, but right now you can see that it has literally no interactions with the sprites. You can see it goes to the goal and there's no such thing as there are no goals being scored, or there's nothing tracking goals being scored. When the ball hits the player 1 and 2, it basically just goes through the whole sprite, and that's not what we want, right? So let's try something here, okay? Let's try when the green, let's do this. Let's get a forever block out first. All right, and let's put it inside the when green flag is clicked. Remember, all these codes are being done in the ball sprite right now, because we're handling what should happen with the ball when we're handling what happens when the ball hits different components, right? So it's the behavior of the ball. So we're gonna get a forever block, and in the forever block, we're going to grab an if then. Okay. So if then, as explained last week, is to really separate different outcomes, different actions according to what happens. So over here, if then, I want to start with what happens if the ball touches player 1. So I'm going to find touching here, first block in the sensing blocks. I'm going to get the player 1 block. And then this one is a bit harder to really do, is that I'm going to set it to a new position. So because in Scratch, there's not really a block for making the ball bounce when it reaches the player. Because there's one for on edge, but there's not really one for when it hits the player. So we have to basically make our own if on edge bounce type of code for when it touches the players. And what we do here is that we basically make it point in direction. We make it point in the direction of, let's see, we want to get a minus from the operators. And over here on the left-hand side, we're going to type in 0. On the right-hand side here, what we're going to do is that we're going to go to motion, go all the way lower so that we can get a block called direction. That's the last block in the Scratch, in the Scratch motion blocks. So essentially what this block does is that it enables the ball to bounce in a very natural way. So we don't want it so that, so remember in the Pong game, what basically happened is that we made the ball just really bounce back in a specific upwards position, right? But it doesn't look too natural because it's just basically forcing the ball up. Over here, we're doing it so that when the ball, for example, when it hits the player 1, it's going to kind of make a natural bounce off. So it's not going to bounce on the player 1 and then go wild and then go like all the way down or like completely go straight like that. That's not how bounces work, right? So that's to make a very realistic bounce effect. So because and if you really want to figure out for why for this block, basically it just turns your direction. It basically just forces it into the direction of the natural bounce. So for explanation for this, I think you can go into our YouTube projects for in later our projects in YouTube later this next week. All right. So let's try for touching player 1 right now. I know actually let's just make it for player 2 also. Now remember this block is basically a type of block for like if touching something bounce in a natural way. So we can do this for player 2 also. We can completely duplicate this and we can make it for touching player 2. Okay, so when the green flag is flicked right here, we can basically almost play the game now. So do you see? Just now when the ball reached the player 2, it bounced off naturally, and the same thing happens when it reaches the blue player. So for player 1, it does the same thing. All right, so everything works pretty fine. And we're going to move on to the final step, which is basically what happens if the ball touches, if the ball has to be scored. So right now, you can see that it plays perfectly fine. The player can interact with the ball, but right now there's no game score, right? So even when the player, supposedly, even if the player scores, nothing happens. Either player scores. So in the when space key, so remember we activate the game inside the when space key press, right? Which is why we want these codes to happen only when the space key is pressed. So only after when the space key is pressed. So what we do here is we get an if then block once again. And we do practically the same. We get another player 1, we get out for touching player 1 again. But this time we're not really gonna make it for touching player 1. Let's do it for touching goal number 1. Okay, so this would be goal 1. Would remember it'll be this block over here. Okay, so let's just take our mind off the score for a bit first. Let's just think about what should happen to the ball to begin with. So when it touches the goal 1, what really should happen is that it would go back to its original position, which is it'll go back to the center to be able to play again. So it'll go to 0, 0. And then it would stop. The game would just, so this script itself would stop. Because here's the point. There's a reason why, so we don't want to completely stop the game because we still want to be able to play it, right? But also the reason why we only stop this specific script. So what this means is that it only stops this whole script. It doesn't stop the scripts in the other sprites, and it doesn't stop the script inside the green flag. And the very key reason why is because I want to make sure that I can still keep playing this game, right? So if I stop the script over here, then basically all of these parts won't work also. But if I make it so that I'm only stopping this specific script, this if then part over here, so I'm only stopping this when space key press over here, I can keep continuing to play the game according to the score, right? So basically I'm just resetting the game. So if it touches the goal 1, then I would do these conditions, and the same thing should happen when it touches the goal 2. Okay? So now if the ball touches the goal one, so I'm just gonna press the space key and then let it play out. Oh, made a save there. All right, let's just try and make it so that direction is a bit, see? So once it hits the goal right here, we can see that, you know, a score is, basically a score happens, which is why the ball goes back to the center as shown just now. And this leaves us with our last part we have to do, which is to make the score. So over here in variables, we're going to make a variable called player one. This player one variable is going to help us save the score. So basically, how much goals the player one has scored. And then we're gonna make one for player two also. So we're gonna make one called P2. Press OK, and you realize that right now they're in a kind of like a top bottom position. And I want to make sure that, you know, the player one score can be shown on the left side and player two score can be shown on the right side. And to do this, I can drag it all the way to the right over here. Yeah, so you can see it now perfectly. And one more thing is that you can play around this. So remember, if you double click on the variables, you can basically make it into a large readout. So you can kind of show it like this. Or you want to show the player one and player two, you can click it a few times again and it will show the label of the variable too. Like this. And then let's see. So once we start, when we start off, we want to make sure that both of the score is 0, right? Because I want to make sure that we start off with fair games. No one should have the advantage to begin with. So both players start off with a score of 0. And this is the part that's a bit tricky. So when the ball touches the goal 1, who scored? It's the player 2 who scored, right? So that's why we have to change, for our variable, for our score, we have to change the player 2 score by 1 instead of the player 1. Because this is a mistake that's commonly made because people think, oh, it's touching goal 1, we'll change it for player 1. That would make it wrong because basically that would mean that you would prefer to be scored on rather than actually trying to score, right? So for here, when it's touching the goal 1, we need to make sure it's the player 2 that's changing the score upwards. And in the same way, if it's touching goal 2, that means that our player 1 has scored, which is why over here, I'll drag my change player 1 by 1 over here. I'll drag this block. So now our game should work completely fine. Let's hope for a good direction, okay? And we can play, so basically I'm playing with myself right now, but you can find a friend to play with for you too. So I'm just gonna make sure everything works. See, so once the scores go left in the middle, the scores update accordingly, and you can continue to play by pressing the space button. So when you press the space button, the scores will still be exactly as it was, but now it will keep saving. So you see it was 1 before, now it's 2, because we just scored 2 goals inexact. So this would bring us to the end of the project today. Hope you really understood the different what happens in the game features, how to really put your mind into how a user can really, how a user would feel playing the game, and essentially how to really handle the event so that you can have 2 sets, so that you can create 2 different sets of movements for 2 different players, right? And so if there are any variations that you'd like to make, feel free to do so yourself. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do. You can, and just within the sounds, just to think of it within the sounds, you can add like a cheer, you know? So within the sounds, you can add a cheer so that, sorry, I'm gonna add a cheer. So there's something called a goal cheer here, which you can use. And so this basically means that once a goal is scored, there'll be a little cheer that happens. You can also set a condition for when either one of the player reaches a score of 5, then they will technically win the whole game. This also works too. So any variations you'd like to make, feel free to do so. If you have any questions about it, feel free to let us know in the Facebook comments, all right? And if you want any notes, any flashcards on what was previously taught this past week, or you want any of the projects the full project, because you might have difficulties building it, make sure you let us know. So let us know on our YouTube. You can comment on it, and you can interact with us in any way that you'd like. I hope you enjoyed the project. Remember to give us a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to keep up with our daily content. I'm Mr. Mark, and this is Scratch Tutorials on Preface Nomad Jr.